Hello, I'm Stefano Maffulli. I'm the Executive Director of the Open Source Initiative, and this is another webinar from the series of Deep Dive AI that we're going to be hosting for a few days. Today we're going to be hearing from Davanam Srinivas, Thierry Carré, and Diane Miller about the challenges of welcoming AI in openly developed open source projects. Enjoy, and we're going to be taking questions at the end.
Hi there, my name is Allison Price, and I am moderating a panel today of open source community leaders around challenges welcoming AI in openly developed open source projects. So before we get started with the line of questions that I personally have around this intersection, let's start with introducing our panelists. Thierry, please kick us off.
Hi everyone, my name is Thierry Carrez. I'm the General Manager for the Open Infra Foundation and also the Vice Chair for the Open Source Initiative. And I've been working on openly developed open source for a while now, and so I'm excited to explore the intersection or the effects of AI on that type of open source.
All right, Diane.
Hi, I'm Diane Mueller, and I've been playing around the edges of open source for nearly 30 years now. And I am now the Director of Research and Advisory Services for Bitergia. And prior to that, I was at Red Hat and a number of other startups working on open source projects. And I currently am part of the CNCF Contributor Growth working groups, and have been thinking, I think, a little too deeply recently about AI and how it intersects and how participation in open source projects will change over time as we bring in new tools like generative AI and the ethics and the governance of that, and how we track the participation of AI tools in our projects. So I'm really kind of excited to have this conversation with everybody here today. So thanks for having me.
Awesome. And last but not least, Dims.
Hi, my nickname is Dims. My name is longer. So I've been doing open source for quite a while across multiple projects and foundations. More recently, I've been spending my time in Kubernetes community in general and in specific and CNCF in general. My work is at AWS. I'm a principal engineer there working on EKS. Back to you, Alison.
Awesome. Well, thank y'all for being here with me today. So, we're really here to explore the impact of AI on openly developed software. So what does that even mean? Let's start there. Aren't all open source projects openly developed? Thierry, maybe you can explain what the topics we're going to be discussing are today.
Yes, so it's not because it's open source that it's openly developed, because open source is really just about the license the code is released under. So you can produce the code in various ways, and as long as it's released under an open source license, it's open source software. So basically, open source does not judge how the software is developed at all. And you can see different models have evolved over time. And there is I would say, what we call the BDFL model, the benevolent dictator for life model, where a single individual is basically acting as a gateway to decide what gets into the code. And it's basically the person that has life or death decisions over the project. And in that case, one person is special, obviously. There is the single vendor model, where it's basically a company developing software and releasing under an open source license. Sometimes they will maintain some kind of a community around it, but in the end, they maintain full control over the project. And in that case, one company is special. And finally, there is the openly developed model, where it's generally organized as a large open collaboration between several individuals working for different organizations, generally under the auspices of an open source foundation. So make sure that nobody owns the keys to the kingdom. So you have this level playing field, everyone can collaborate as equals. And in that case, you have a strong governance model to describe how the project works. And in that case, nobody is special. Basically, nobody has a special authority. It's your contribution that will decide how much impact or influence you have on the project. And so those are the different styles. And what we're looking into here is more the effect of AI on that specific style of open source development. And I can talk more about the 4 opens if you want after, but I want to let the others add to this if they want to give examples or.
I think you kind of hit the nails on the head there. The 3 sort of different models we have of open source, and there are many variations on that. Collaborations between multiple companies on different projects as well, and foundation-driven efforts, as DIMS and Terry and I have all participated in Open Infra and CNCF projects. So I think the interesting thing about is where the challenges come in bringing AI and what the boundaries are around AI in these different spaces, and different companies or different benevolent dictators for life, or different foundations or groups governing projects will make different decisions. And the landscape is continually changing about what AI is. And AI is a lot of things, from code completion and syntax checking in Visual Studio, which seemed at the time like, wow, amazing color coded stuff in your Visual Studio at the time. And then to Copilot, which is doing some suggestions and things like that, to machine learning and probability stuff, to this generative AI that is the hot mess that we're all in right now, trying to negotiate with. There are a lot of things that impact, and there are going to be a lot of decisions that people have to make about how to use this stuff. But it has been coming for a long time. So a lot of people have thought about it. A lot of people have used Copilot, code completion, all kinds of different tools over time. Coming from a DevOps background and DevOps heavy environments, we are always saying automate, 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 automate everything. I'm going to automate my social life, or automate my coding and automate my testing and builds. And from a Bitergia's perspective, someone who monitors community health and participation, we've always kind of tracked and put metadata tags on bots so that we knew to segregate bots out from actual participants in projects. Now we have a different kind of bots, different kind of code, and a different kind of participation in the project. And so it's going to take some thinking and some time, but I think it will evolve, and it will be something that we can successfully integrate into some of our open projects and openly governed projects. So those are my beginning thoughts, and we'll see how Terry and DIMS change my mind over time.
So Thierry and Diane covered a whole bunch of things. So personally, my view is around how does it change as a person on a day-to-day basis who is working in collaborative open source communities? What does it change for me, in my day-to-day work, day-to-day collaboration, and do I have to do different things in different foundations, in different projects, and is it going to be more easier, more difficult? That is the kind of thing, practical day-to-day stuff that interests me a lot in this discussion.
Well, and you mentioned something, Thierry, called the 4 opens, and I think that's something we're going to really dive into during this episode in terms of, how do the different facets of a sustainable open source project and community, how are they going to be affected by this emerging use case? So can you actually provide an overview of what those 4 opens are that we'll be going through today?
Yes, really quickly. It's a model that we created when we launched OpenStack, and that was adopted by other projects since basically a set of 4 principles that can apply to describe open collaboration. And so it starts with open source. Obviously, it has to be released under an open source license, but then you also want open development, everything being transparently developed, accessible to everyone. You can see the patches, you can participate in the reviews, etc. Open design, which is that the fact that the design of the software should also happen in the open and include users and all the participants. And finally, open community, which is all the governance aspect where everyone can participate and be elected as a project leader in those communities, and everyone is an equal participant based on their contribution. And so yes, we can look at the impact of AI on those 4 facets, because it really helps uh, uh, reassess the impact that AI can have, or at least organize the discussion around it.
Mm-hmm. Well, and one thing I kind of want to go back to that, Diane, you were saying, so, we've had the bots in the past that have contributed upstream to open source projects, but now it's actually becoming more common to actually, are we going to call AI a new contributor, or are we going to weed those out? Like, Bitergia is, of course, leading a lot of the analysis of these contributions, but where do you think we're heading with how AI is classified as an upstream contributor?
Oh, that's a good one. And it's a sticky wicket too. I think because it will change over time. And so whatever I'm saying right now today is based on what I know about the different AI tools that are out there. So just take that as a grain of or block of salt. And we're all still really just kind of mostly experimenting with incorporating it into our workflows and our processes. But I see there's a whole scope of what is AI. So it covers everything from code completions pieces to and code piloty things and machine intelligence and algorithms and models and all of that to this generative stuff that is, as I say, the new hot mess that we're in, and which is really kind of wonderful and scary at the same time. I kind of have been looking at it from a couple of perspectives, from measuring it. Like, how do I tell when someone is using AI generated content in a project or in a design flow or something like that? So from a metrics point of view, there are a lot of conversations right now about, especially from music and art. And there was a great congressional hearing. I can't believe I've actually watched a Senate hearing on AI and copyright the other day, but there was an interesting comment made by an artist, Carlo Ortiz, about the 3 C's and the 1 T. I think the 3 C's, if I get it right, are consent, credit, compensation, and the T was transparency. And she was or is an artist for animation in the Marvel comic book series. So she's done a lot. You've seen her work, and she's very scared about not getting credit for the stuff that she's working on. And I think with the conversations that we have about open source licensing and what is actually being used to generate the learning in the AI tools, there's a piece of that we have to examine, like who gets credit and is there a great attribution and is someone and there's very little transparency right now. Like if you generate something in the poem in the tone of Robert Frost, Two Roads Diverge kind of guy, he's not getting any credit for it. And if someone sings a song and it's that in the voice of Leonard Cohen, they don't get Leonard Cohen's not getting any compensation for that. He may be dead, but his trust never to do it. And I'm getting old, so that's the kind of music I've been listening to lately. But I think we have two sides to this coin: is the code that we're using and getting generated. Where is it coming from? And thinking deeply about the ethics of that. Mostly, there's options to opt out of having your code sucked in. That's not great because they've already sucked in most of our code anyways. And then on the other side, when the output from these, is it getting properly attributed? How do we license it? How do we acknowledge that it's there? So participation is a big word. Community is a big word too. And so I think we have to think deeply about, first, I'd love to see some metadata tags when we're doing a submit. This came from, GPT Chat 2, or this came from CodePilot, or, wherever it is, whatever Amazon tool you have to play with lately, DIMS. I'd like to see that baseline set. So at least we know the output that we're tracking has either someone has used a chunk of code in their code submission, or the entire code submission has been generated, or we're flagging the actual participant. So when you see someone in devstats.io on there, it's flagged as this is an AI generated
right.
pull request, those kinds of things. So I think we have to think deeply about that, as well as the ethics. And I really do like those, the 3 C's and the T. The transparency, I think right now is the thing that's top of mind for me. I think maybe the cart has already left the garage or whatever on the learning models, and that's something that the Congress can figure out how to do. But I do think on the output side is really the transparency there is key for me to understand better and to really figure out how we're going to track that as community managers and architects.
Right. So just drilling down into the open source and the open development pieces that Thierry was talking about, and Diane was also talking about, like, hey, it would be good to have, where is it coming from? So there are some tools available in the market where there is a reference tracker. The reference tracker tells you where the original code was and like what was the license it was under and point us to the code. So there is some amount of like, okay, when you're submitting a PR, there is some additional information that you can submit to say, see, this is where I got it from. But I don't know if we'll be able to like have a separate entry in devstats.io for the AI/ML. I think it's going to be more like, as part and parcel of a daily process of developers, they'll be using these tools. So you can't separate, distinguish their regular work from these additional enhancements that were added on by, looking up things or the AI suggesting things to them in their IDEs. So I'll give you an example, right? Like, so for example, there is a lot of people who are coming into communities and they typically start with typos, right? Like they go around finding stuff and fixing stuff. But what if, these AI tools help them get a leg up, like give them context, why things are where they are, and maybe it's not really a typo, it is by design, it's an acronym that is used. Like if it helps them get started, that is a really good thing. Fake it till you make it, right? Like, so your PRs are not really typos to begin with. It'll be actually things that are useful to the people that are working on the projects. And like typically we have this averse reaction of like 5 typo PRs in a row, and then we are like, okay, I'm not going to touch anything from this person because they have this. So if it helps in those kinds of things, if it helps reduces the burden on the people who are actually working on the projects and who are starved for time, I think that is a good win. But then looking through the guidance from ASF, it seems like they are shifting some of the things to the reviewers, and the reviewers have to do more in this case because the reviewers have they are the ones that have to hold down the fort. They have to distinguish between is it coming from an AI, is it coming from a real person, and like is the AI picking it up from somewhere where we don't know and we don't trust, and whether it is a license that we don't want to get into the project. So that makes it harder on the life of the people who are the reviewers, right? So that becomes, so it is a good and bad. But then there is this other set of tools that we already have, which is the scanners who can go around tell after the fact, after the code has merged, that hey, this is plagiarism. There is an existing project which has the same. So there are tools that will help, but it feels like the tools those kinds of tools can only help after the fact, and then you have to go rip out the code that you have, so it becomes a mess. So basically what I'm trying to say is, like, we will end up having tools both in the open source side of things integrated into the IDEs, open development side of things, where people can collaborate together to work on things as well. But it's going to take some time for us to see the full potential of what is possible here.
I'll just add to what you just said, that I expect there to be more of a spectrum between, a pure human contribution and a pure AI contribution, and everything will be AI assisted in some ways. And so it will be difficult. Like when it's generated by a bot, it's easy because it's very binary. It's bot or non-bot. And now we'll have like, well, I just used code completion. Here I just like use code completion, but just like copied the full paragraph. And then like, and there will also be like pure AI contributions where no human input is involved. And so it's I think what will make it extra difficult compared to other type of classifications. And I agree, we need to define that, to create a topology to describe it, because otherwise it's going to be, well, some AI participated in it, but you will not be able to really classify.
Right. Just to finish one thought, which I left half said was, what if the things that the bots got trained on have a lot of security related things, right? Like CVEs, and like if it got trained on like, hey, don't do this piece of code, and here is the piece of code that you should not do, and there's many of them all over the place, then the bot might end up suggesting that, and like it might perpetuate exactly this same security problem across multiple projects, right? So that becomes like one more problem for the reviewers, because they have to watch out for these things. So it becomes like a security nightmare as well.
So I would just put in too, is like we're talking about bug detection, a little bit of code generation, syntax completion, those kinds of things. But there's some really great opportunities here for Robert Frost plus Leonard Cohen, plus that we could take Dims and Terry and Diane, and we could take 3 sections of code and generate a recombinant output from that took all of our inputs and created something that we would not have thought of. And so there's an awesome opportunity here for a collective recombinant intelligence. And how we engage in those conversations is really interesting to me. Again, with attribution and licensing and all of that. But the possibility is, to get a Leonard Cohen version of Robert Frost done by Drake, right? A kind of thing with code, and the possibilities of coming up and brainstorming with AI and generative chat tools can really be a huge positive for open source, especially in projects that are resource constricted, shall we say, sometimes. So getting that extra added value. So it's not that I'm worried about machine learning that does bug detection or code creation or syntax completion or suggestion. Those things I think we can figure out, eventually. And those things are going to help our process. I'm kind of interested in this other domain around consensual conversations, a consensual domain where we have those collaborative conversations and how we strategize those things. So that's going to be an interesting impact for openly developed projects.
Well, and speaking of openly developed, and I think, we really covered open source as one of the 4 opens, and we're already halfway through the episode and we've gone through 1. So I'm going to speed things up a little bit. And, the next one that Thierry talked about was open development. So Thierry, how do you feel like open development is going to be impacted by AI?
So I think Dims touched on it earlier. I feel like I expect there will be an imbalance because submitting patches will be immensely easier. Like we make writing code a lot easier. Everyone will be able to submit a patch. And at the same time, we know that generative AI and large language models can hallucinate solutions because they just like try to complete words. And in some cases, magic happens. In some others, magic breaks. And so the work is going to be pushed back to reviewers, which concerns me a lot because those are the scarce resources in every project. Even popular projects like Kubernetes or OpenStack, we are suffering from the imbalance between the people that submit patches, that want to fix bugs, that want to add features, and the people that are the gatekeepers of code quality, maintenance, and all of those things. I expect that imbalance to grow with AI being poured into it. And I don't know. I'm interested in Dim's point of view here because I feel like it's a pretty subtle balance we have between reviewers and code code submitters. And I feel like this could completely break it because it's already difficult to convert those authors into reviewers as it is.
Right.
But if you double the number of authors, how do you do it?
Right. So we talk about a career ladder within open source projects, and like we say, hey, you're a regular contributor, GitHub, you come, you do a PR, and do some stuff here, and then we'll make you a reviewer once we have consistency, and then from reviewer to committer, and then become an owner or a maintainer in specific projects. So yes, the influx of PRs is going to be a challenge, and that is definitely where we will need tools to like hold up, I don't know, a whole bunch of tools that need to be developed there. Like we do have things like dependency bot and things like that, which take care of some of the things, but then we need additional. So the hard part right now is like making sure that the incoming PRs don't break existing stuff, and not everything is covered by testing, right? Or it is hard to test. So, and like we literally in Kubernetes, we burn about $2 million in worth of testing on GCP and $1 million on AWS. And we feel that is still not enough, right? Because just the variations that we need to test, and like making sure that the flakes that are happening are getting diagnosed on a periodic basis. And the last Labor Day weekend, we were trying something on Thursday, Friday, and we had to go and fix things, and so that people, when they come back from vacation, they have like a clean slate to start from, right? So that is very hard right now, and this is not going to help. And it's a sincere request for people who are thinking about these matters, not to also help think about our use case, which is the reviewers and approvers, and not just the people who are doing the PRs.
So there's also an emergence, and I've had a couple of conversations with people about AI ops, and it may be a buzzword at the moment, but it's can we apply some of these technologies to the review process and the tooling that we need to do that? Because the scaling of reviewers and contributors, has been a constant problem for open source projects, whether they're big ones like Kubernetes or tiny ones that, are key to, etcd kind of small ones that we need to grow people. And the tooling isn't there yet. But the technologies are there to do some of this. And even in the telco space, I've had conversations with people who are starting to apply AI techniques and tooling to their operational side of things. And it's an investment from some of the foundations and other projects in applying some of this technology, not just to generating code, but to reviewing code and to helping us that automate some of that process as well, and flagging things for us, I think is in the offing, though I haven't heard a startup written around it. So yeah, but I'm hoping soon that people will start thinking about that if they haven't already. And if they have already, come flag us and tell us about it.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that kind of opens up for my next open, which, Diane, I wanted to throw to you, like with all of those processes, like how is open design going to be impacted? Like, do we have a potential future where code's no longer designed, we just have requirements being expressed? Or how do we see that kind of changing with AI being an active participant?
Well, the requirements gathering and questioning of, what we need and what we do, that is almost textbook input for GPT chat type things. So there's some interesting possibilities there. The Q&A process for requirements gathering. I mentioned before this idea of consensual domain too. It's not any strange thing here. It's been talked about before, but when we're talking with each other, like we are here, we're engaged in a conversation, we're sharing goals, we're sharing observations and objectives, and we're all functioning like sort of a unit. And when we add in AI to that process of collaboration, the response we get back from the AI is, feels similar right now to, the what Terry might tell me to do, and for a certain module, and Open Infra's ecosystem, or DIMS might say about a Kubernetes ecosystem project. So we already have this world where we do converse about open design and open development and all these kinds of things. And it feels a lot like AI chat is just adding another participant in those conversations. But I think it's going to be the governance of that. We've already spent a lot of time in open source doing codes of conduct, maintainers and contribution ladders, all the different processes that we put in place to make sure that it is open. So the other concern I have is that companies that have access to these tools, AI tools, will have an advantage over individuals who don't. So I think there's a little leveling of the playing ground in the open AI tooling and things. It's going to be an interesting world to see how if hopefully we don't create classes of developers. Developers have tools to these, access to these tools because they work for a big corporation, or because, or they don't because they live in a geographic region that doesn't have the compute power to run them, or something along that lines. So I think it's there's a whole lot of opportunity. So I'm not naysaying the thing. I think there's a huge opportunity to do recombinant strategy development and open design coming. It's just how do we balance the governance and the ethics of that and keep it a safe and open place for everybody to participate.
Right. So adding on to what Diana was saying, like I see it in two facets, right? One is the design and development of the project itself. And also, how do you actually use it in the real world also, right? Like best practices, white papers, and, generating those kinds of artifacts which are actually useful to the people who consume the project will be like a big plus, I think, right? Like when you collect information from, like right now, what do? We send out 25 questions to a whole bunch of people, and some of them respond, some of them don't respond, right? And then we try to make sense of it. But then if we are able to, if each company or each adopter or each cluster, if we are able to gather information about like what isn't there, how does it work, how did they put it together, and like make some sense out of it, and crystallize the learnings somehow into things that can be reused by other people, I think that is going to be a big deal as well for the end users of the projects, in addition to the developers of the original project.
Yeah, and I could see but much more in the future, a world where you would not just use AI to help you write code, but to completely solve problems. And like we've been using AI for complex problems like vision recognition or meteorological models, predictions, and all those things where we don't really know how to solve the problem. You just describe what you want and you train the model until it produces what you want. And I could feel that turn into much more of an extreme form of QA and test-driven development, where you would describe the output that you want and no longer the code. And that would change a lot how we do design of the software, for sure, because we would no longer express requirements in I would say what you want out of the software, but more we would move from designing how to do things to describing how to test that the output is correct. And so that is much more long term. It's not today, but it's probably pretty close. So we'll be impacted by that as well.
Yeah, I also think there's some thinking we have to do about the biases that we have, because when we think about generating something until we get an output we like, it may not necessarily be the right answer to the problem. We may be talking about how do we scale clusters, or things like that, and we're not talking about the energy input to the servers that are hosting all of those clusters. So we have a duty, I guess, to make sure that that the inputs, that the questions we're doing, and our biases are on the table, and that we're open to other perspectives other than this is like, I know how many times have I designed a UI, and if I've used Bing artistry to create an image for me, and then I've seen how warped the picture looks like. That's kind of how I do UI design, so don't ask me to. But I am not coming up with the optimal one. It may be optimal for me. It may not be optimal for everyone. And there are a lot of interesting studies that I've been glazing my eyes over the past few days thinking about. But I also think we have some real opportunities here to come up with things that we didn't even think about, because even some of the art that we've generated with Bing's tools and things like that, it's really pretty cool. But it brings me back to those 3 C's and the T. Did the artist consent? Did the coder consent? Did they get credit for it? Are they getting compensated for it? And do we know where it came from? And that will help us correct some of the bias issues in this. I'm like totally on board with doing this work. I think we're just struggling with some of the concepts around how to do it ethically and to govern it. I think that's going to be it. But I am really going to be happy when we can do some hot Q&A on requirements docs
Mm-hmm.
live with GPT chat and get to see what the interesting results might be. And it's going to take some time.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's been really interesting to hear. Like, I think it really naturally just, y'all talked about open community even as part of open design. And, y'all have all been in the open source broad community, regardless of which specific project, for a really long time. And during this webinar, even I've heard concerns, but interesting, and opportunity and threats. So my last question, and before we wrap, is, are y'all hopeful for this future where AI is an active contributor in open source communities? Diane, you just kind of came off of it saying you're really excited. So would you say you're hopeful for this shift in contribution?
I am, but things like the SAG artist and writers strike worry me, and I think that's why maybe today I've been like threading on the consent and the attribution and all in the transparency side of things, because I think we haven't worked that out, but we've already gone ahead. Right. So billions of lines of code have already been consumed by large language learning models. And we didn't really say much about it. So I'm not sure you can go back. We can't reel that fish in, really. But I'm hopeful that we can there can be some huge resource benefits to open source openly developed projects, because we've always been resource constrained. And it's not developer, it's automate, but automate with some ethics and governance in place.
Yep. How about you, Dims? How do you feel about this future?
So coming into this call, I thought we were going to talk more about licenses and copyright, but clearly we didn't. But that's okay. That's cool. And I'm definitely on like, they are tools. We have to figure out how best to use them and how to make our lives better, all around for everybody that are part of the open source communities, right? So that's what I'm looking for at this point.
Thierry, what about you?
I agree with Dims. We didn't have the chance to touch on the licensing part. I'm pretty sure will be covered in other webinars of the same series, but there is an interesting set of constraints there that creates a lot of open questions, I would say. So I'm concerned by a number of things around, especially like the imbalance between developers and reviewers that we touched on, the fact that we will have a spectrum between fully AI assisted and just some help from AI, and how does that create multiple classes of contributors? How do we preserve open community principles with that? Because we have this idea that we should have one vote for each contributor, but if each contributor is not worth the same, how long can you maintain that? With AI-assisted contributions, can you really give a vote on your project to anyone that can just push a button? Like how does that will affect the governance of our projects? So I'm concerned on one hand, but I'm also hopeful on the other, because we're just barely scratching the surface of what those tools can do. There's currently really a land grab rush on the new capabilities of large language models and like the magic emerging properties that they have, but so everything is focused right now on code generation. But I hope that the tools to help us properly review, test better, and also govern better will emerge from AI tooling as well. And that's why I'm hopeful. It's kind of a low moment right now, because we're hit by the code generation aspects and the fact that our code is, I would say, absorbed by those machines that will regurgitate it in various settings, and we can't really control that. So there's this bit of a low point in how AI affects open development right now. But over the long run, I'm hopeful that the other tools will be developed and that it will help with the other aspects, and that it will not break the subtle balance that our openly developed open source projects rely on today.
Mhm.
I would just add, we could go on for another hour about intellectual property and copyright issues around all of this. And there's two sides to the coin. I've been ranting about giving credit and all of this, but when we enter information into GPT chat and we do these collaborations, we're basically donating our thoughts and ideas into the learning model for that piece of AI. And so for enterprises and individuals who want to participate in this, there needs to be some also thinking around, because I don't think there is any verifiable data governance or protection assurances for people who are using these tools. So there's lots of sides to this coin. It's kind of the Rubik's Cube of craziness right now. But the opportunity is there. And, I know you have a whole series coming from the Open Infra on this, so I'm looking forward to someone doing a deep dive on IP and copyright. I am not a copyright lawyer, so I'm not that person, but I've been trying to really advise people a little bit, whether they're enterprises or individuals, about taking some necessary cautions too as they participate, and think deeply about this.
No, I think you're completely right. And there's so many topics to cover just within AI and open source. And I'm really thankful the Open Source Initiative put together this webinar series around the intersection between AI and open source. And I really appreciate all of y'all joining and teaching me a lot more about the intersection, and joining the rest of the viewers for a live Q&A momentarily. So thank you, everyone, and appreciate y'all sharing your wisdom today.